Today I want to talk about the incredible story of the Last Supper. We'll go into more details as time goes on. The churches of God, including this little congregation here, will assemble at a specific date. How do we know what that date should be? Well, that's easy to figure out. If you go to John the 19th chapter, John 19, and we read about the events after Jesus' crucifixion. And verse 31, John 19:31, and the Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that day was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Without going into lots of details why legs were to be broken or whatever, the Jews wanted the bodies off the cross. So they would not be on the crosses. There were three bodies, Jesus and the two malefactors, as they called them. They didn't want them to be on the crosses on the high day, on the holy day. And the holy day at the time of the Passover is the first day of unleavened bread. So, if tomorrow was the holy day and Jesus was crucified today, tomorrow would be the 15th day of the first month, according to the Hebrew calendar. And that 15th day is when the full moon is, because in the Hebrew calendar, the month starts with the new moon, so halfway through the month is the full moon. So everybody would know when the full moon is. Even a shepherd out in the field by himself, he would know when the full moon is. So that's how we get the date that we keep the Lord's Supper, the participating in the bread and the wine on the Lord's Supper. Last Sunday, we were over at a picnic at Bonham Lake with my children and grandchildren, and all their family, my son-in-law's family came there. And of course, all of them had come from church. Very religious group of people. And I was sitting listening to them as they were discussing the various services that they had attended. And I was intrigued. I almost said something, but I thought, no, I won't do that. Because the one lot said, oh, we had the Lord's Supper at 9 o'clock. And the other said, oh, we had the Lord's Supper at 11. Of course, the question I wanted to ask was, why have a supper in the morning? Why have the Lord's Supper in the morning? See, most people just never stop and ask a question like that. It was a supper that Jesus was eating that evening, which is why we keep that evening. Today I want to take you on a little bit of a journey, very briefly. How did Jesus get there? He started up in Galilee. That's where he and his disciples were. And then they traveled south to go down to Jerusalem. Two routes they could have taken. The one through the central part of the country, through Samaria. But he didn't go that way. He went the other route, which is from you looking, would be down on the eastern side, along the valley of the Jordan River. So if you were to take the time and read all the gospel accounts or read it in a harmony of the gospels, that's what you would find, that they were coming down the Jordan River and actually spend time on the other side of the Jordan River, which today is the country of Jordan on the other side, in the area what was known then as Perea, because a lot of Jews lived there. So some books actually talk about his Perean ministry, and you can see that some of the teachings were actually done over there. Then they would have arrived down at Jericho. It actually says that in the Gospels. They got down to Jericho. Jericho is down by the Dead Sea. And then from Jericho, as you read the story, it says, they said, let us go up to Jerusalem. It's very logical. Jericho is more than 1,000 feet below sea level. So from there you go up to Jerusalem. What's interesting is if we go to Luke 18, I won't go to too many scriptures, but just to kind of give you a slight picture, and you need to take the time and read the entire accounts. But in Luke 18, verse 31, this is when Jesus was down by Jericho, because we find in chapter 19, Jesus entered and went through Jericho. So this is just before that. He took unto him the 12 and said unto them, behold, we go up to Jerusalem. Can you understand now? We go up to Jerusalem. And all things that are written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man shall be accomplished. For he shall be delivered unto the Gentiles, and shall be mocked, and spitefully entreated, and spat upon. And they shall scourge him, and put him to death, and the third day he shall rise again. Why do I mention that? Well, this is the first time Jesus told them this is what's going to happen. What was their reaction? And they understood none of these things. And this saying was hid from them, neither knew they the things which were spoken. They didn't get it. They didn't get the fact that he said, we're going up to Jerusalem and they are going to kill me. And the poor disciples just didn't understand. Like sometimes we don't understand. And later we understand. You can follow the story. They go up, a couple of days' journey up to Jerusalem. They don't go to Jerusalem, they go to Bethany. Why would they go to Bethany? Because his friends lived there, Lazarus and Mary and Martha, which is why Jesus went to Bethany. It's all logical. From there, he enters Jerusalem. When he enters Jerusalem, there is a whole group of people, singing praises to him and all that kind of things. So all those chapters all fit in there. He goes into the temple. You get to Matthew 23. He's standing in the temple. And he says, you scribes, you Pharisees, and he really gives them a lecture. Of course, he knew before that even it said that the Jews were conspiring to kill him. They were waiting for him. But it was kind of hard to kill him because here are all the people, praising him. Then we find he leaves the temple. He goes up to the Mount of Olives. And that's where he speaks the Olivet prophecy in Matthew 24. And that prophecy goes all the way through Matthew 24 into chapter 25. And it ends there. And then we get to Matthew 26. Let's turn there. Matthew 26. So I want you, and during this time when I have time to talk, and I'm sure when I'm preaching I'll cover more of this, so we get this picture of what happened there, rather than just read a few little scriptures and think we know it all. Matthew 26. Verse 1, and it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, which were the sayings that he had made on the Mount of Olives, which covered chapter 24 and chapter 25, he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is to be betrayed and crucified. Then it says the chief priests got together, they were conspiring. So imagine, here's Jesus with his disciples. He's telling them, I'm going to be killed. Way off somewhere, maybe in the temple. Chief priests, they're also conspiring to kill Jesus. If you look at all the accounts, you find that the disciples came to Jesus and said, where do you want us to prepare so you can eat the Passover? Luke's account is interesting. He says in Luke, Jesus says to the disciples, you go into the city and you'll see a man carrying water. Follow that man, and the place he goes to, go to that house and say, the master wants to eat the Passover here. You know, we don't stop and think about that. You know, how many men would have been carrying water? The answer is very few. If you know those societies, which some of them still exist, I lived in Africa, I have never seen a man carry water. It is always the woman carrying the water. Yeah, in Africa they put it on their heads. In fact, before my wife went to South Africa, I said to her, now one thing you have to realize when we go to Africa, you're going to have to learn to carry water on your head. And my dutiful wife said, well, okay. She didn't know how she was going to do it, but I guess if I'm going to go to Africa, I'm going to have to learn to carry water on my head. And it's amazing how the African women, they just walk. They have these giant big 20-gallon of water on their head, or 20 liters or whatever it is, but anyway, it's a big tin, this big, on their head, and they walk with it straight up, and they don't even hold it there. They just balance it there, and they just walk. That's the way they carry. Anyway, this is what you see as you stop and look at the scriptures and say, what do I see there? They follow this man, they get to the place with the upper room, and preparations are made for the Passover. Verse 20 of Matthew 26, verse 20. Now when even was come, he sat down with the 12. What time would that have been? When even was come. Let's go to Mark. See the parallel account in Mark 14, verse 17. I like people to look at the scriptures and say, wait a minute, let me look at this very carefully. Mark 14, verse 17. In the evening he came with the 12. In the evening. If you were to give a time, it would be what? Just after sunset? Like when you will arrive here on that evening? Just after sunset? Right? That's when you'd walk in. Jesus and his disciples walked into the upper room, ready for that evening. What would you have seen in the upper room? Maybe a little table just this high off the ground, and you would have seen some cushions because they didn't sit on chairs in those days. That big fresco over in Italy with the Lord's Supper, that's fake. Bunch of Italians sitting around a table. That's not the way it was. They were sitting on cushions or mats on the floor. So here's Jesus and his disciples walk in to this room, and what would you see on that table? You know, for about 30 years, I said what was on the table was the Passover lamb, the Passover lamb. In about 1992, I stopped and I thought, wait a bit, because I read an article that kind of triggered me, caused me to think. Wait a minute, I just walked in the door at sunset in the evening. I walk in the door, here I am in the upper room, a Passover lamb there that was roasted. You know, sometimes you think, how long can one be an idiot? I'm talking about myself. Because if anybody knew something about lambs and slaughtering lambs and roasting lambs, I knew. Because that is where we got our meat from when I was a child. All through my teenage years, right into high school until I left home, we slaughtered 3 or 4 lambs every single year. We slaughtered it. I did it with my brothers. What does it take to slaughter a lamb? Anybody here slaughtered a lamb? Nobody. Anybody here slaughtered any animal? Oh, watch out for the pianist. How long does it take to slaughter a lamb? You got to cut the throat. You got to bleed it. We used to catch the blood in a bucket, which we then cooked and served to the dogs. Very good for the dogs. Takes a little time. And then you've got to skin this animal. Right? You cut it down around the neck, down the middle. I've got the shape. I can, down the middle, up with the legs up till about there, and then you cut it all the way around. Do the same there. And if you've got 4 brothers, each one's got a leg, right? And then you slit it down here all the way to the middle, and then you start pulling the skin away, and you've got to help it with a knife until you get it loose, and then you can put your fist in there, and you go boom, 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 boom until it's loose, and then you can just strip the skin off. Right. Then you hang it up by its hind legs or front legs, whatever, because then you've got to gut the thing. You cut the front, and what happens when you cut the stomach this way, all this falls out. And we used to have a little kind of a cast iron bathtub that we held, and all this lot would just fall right out into this little bathtub. Now on the TV show Alaska, they show people slaughtering animals there. I see they just leave all that stuff out there for the bears. I can understand, because it's half a lot of work to clean that. A word for all his intestines and stuff is offal. Ever heard of offal? Some people are educated. This is offal. The tripe, that's a stomach, which you have to cut open, take all the goop out, and throw that. Good compost. Then you got to clean the tripe. Some clean it real well, others don't clean it so well. You have dirty tripe and clean tripe. You can buy either way. If you have a dog that has skin problems, feed it some dirty tripe. It'll clean up their skins. It's amazing. You have skin problems, try tripe, dirty tripe. Some people talk to the African Americans, they'll tell you. Mexican people, they'll tell you about tripe. Don't the Mexican people call it manuda or something? I can't cook it at home. My son-in-law, he hates the stuff, so I can't cook tripe. But you got the tripe, you've got the intestines. You ever tried cleaning intestines? Why do I mention that? I mention that because the original instruction about killing the Passover lamb is you will eat the lamb whole with the, King James language, pertinence thereof. What a funny word. The New Translation says, with the innards. Oh, we got to eat the innards too. Heart, lung, liver. So you got to clean it. Then you've got to roast it. You've got to roast a whole lamb. Not chopped up because you couldn't break its bones. Very interesting. So you're roasting a whole lamb. Now, I often roasted lambs for church picnics and church congregations. So I know what it's like to roast lambs. This is why I can't understand. I never thought about it. I know that if we're going to eat a lamb at 12 o'clock for lunch, I have to get that lamb on the fire at 8 o'clock. Then I know it gives me plenty of time to have it ready by 12 o'clock. Maybe by 11, but 12 o'clock it's ready. Now, if you haven't roasted a lamb, let's just think of a chicken. Virtually every Friday, I roast a chicken for our Friday night supper. You've all roasted a chicken, surely? How long does it take? A couple of hours. That's even in a nice oven. And I hope you're thankful every time that you don't have to slaughter it and defeather it and clean it out, because that'll add half an hour to it. Take something a little bigger. A turkey. Who hasn't roasted a turkey? This is America. We have Thanksgiving. We have 4th of July. Do we have turkeys at 4th of July? No, that's hamburger and hot dogs, isn't it? Anyway, I roast at least 3 turkeys a year. I have one in the deep freeze now that's ready to be roasted because I was given 3 turkeys this year. I'm thankful I don't have to kill the turkey and clean it and take the guts out and all that stuff. That takes time. But I know if I want to roast a turkey, I've got to get it in the oven, and it takes several hours to roast a turkey. How long would it take to roast a lamb? You know, one preacher I wrote to, I said to him, explain this. And he wrote back, and then he told a whole bunch of people that Botha is wrong in what he's saying, because he and some other person took 2 baby lambs and they cut all the meat off the baby lambs, and he said there was only about 2 pounds of meat and that can be roasted quickly. I thought, can you be so foolish? That's not what the Bible said, to take a baby lamb and cut the meat off, throw that away. I wrote back, I said, which part of Jesus Christ's body are you going to throw away and not roast? Plus the Bible says don't go killing baby lambs. That's what Herod did. Remember the story? King Herod? He tried to kill the baby lamb. He tried to kill Jesus when he was a child. What was the instruction in Exodus? We'll look at that some other time. It says you take a lamb of the first year, which means the lamb could have been 8 months, 9 months, 11 months. What size of a lamb is that? Well, enough to feed all of us. In fact, it said, if it's too big, you get the neighbors to come in. You know, 2 households. That could have been quite a group of people. Take Jesus' evening. There were 13 men there. Baby lamb. Here's another interesting thing. You know, the more I think about this, I think, you know, the reason why we don't understand, you know, King David said, a good understanding have they that keep his commandments. You know, those people who actually did what God said they should do, they knew what they did. You know, you take time, you kill a lamb. You go in and choose a lamb, and then you keep it until the 14th day, and you slaughter it on the 14th day. That takes time. Then you got to roast it. You couldn't have done all that between sunset and the time then Jesus and his disciples walked in to the upper room. It's impossible. And I've said to these ministers who've argued with me, and they have, you know, issued papal bulls against me and all that kind of stuff, you know, as if I'm trying to change the time we keep the Lord's Supper. No, we got the correct time. We know that. I'm just saying, did they actually eat a Passover lamb that evening? And the answer is, it's impossible. They couldn't have. Look at some of the very interesting things that happened that day. Go to Mark 15. Mark 15. Verse 25, it says, it was the 3rd hour and they crucified him. This is the next day now, right? But on the 14th day, the 3rd hour was 9 o'clock, about. 3rd day of the day part. They crucified Jesus. At the 6th hour, we find in verse 33, darkness came over. Right? Verse 34, at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. And if you put the whole story together, that's when Jesus died. Now, everybody agrees with that. Jesus died around about 3 o'clock. What else happened about 3 o'clock? If a Jew reads this, he knows the story. He knows what happened. And most other scholars know it. They've seen it. What happened at 3 o'clock was that's the exact time when the priests over at the temple started slaughtering the Passover lambs. You see, at the temple, every day there was a morning and evening sacrifice. Now, the morning sacrifice was not done at sunrise, and the evening sacrifice was not done at sunset. Morning sacrifice was done mid-morning, evening sacrifice was done mid-afternoon. Just to give you, that's the story, how the Jews did it. So normally, on a normal day, at about 3 o'clock, they would have the evening sacrifice. It took time to do these things. Except for the day of the Passover. That sacrifice was moved an hour earlier to allow the Passover to be sacrificed at 3 o'clock. Now, it's interesting, the Bible is very specific about when Jesus died. And it's amazing that if you check Josephus, if you check the Talmud, if you check all the historical records, they will tell you the lambs were slaughtered at the temple starting at 3 o'clock. Imagine the picture. You have hundreds of lambs, maybe thousands. You have many priests already. But the sun had blacked out. And then the sun comes out just at 3 o'clock. And people say, oh, we can go ahead with the Passover sacrifice. And the high priest takes a knife and he kills the first lamb, and hundreds of lambs are immediately killed. And at that time, that very same time, a soldier takes a spear and shoves it into Jesus' side and kills him. Is somebody going to tell me that Jesus died at a time when the wrong Passovers were being killed? No. The New Testament never says that there's a wrong Passover. If there was a wrong Passover, Jesus would have told them. Go back to Matthew 23, we find what he told the Pharisees, everything that was wrong with them, but he didn't mention the Passover. What Passover did Zacharias or John the Baptist or Joseph and Mary, what Passover did they keep? A different one? No. I don't know where he was at the time, but my guess is when those Passover lambs on that specific day were being killed, one of the men standing there watching this lot would have been a man called Saul of Tarsus, who we know was down there. We can assume that he was down there. And like many other times, he would have seen the lambs killed, not even thinking about the fact of this person that they were crucifying out there. And yet later, imagine when Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians, and he writes, Christ, our Passover, sacrificed for us. What would that have meant for somebody who actually was standing there seeing the lambs killed and not knowing that the true Passover lamb was actually being killed right there outside the wall? Can you see what this really pictures to us? You see, in the Old Testament, the lamb was killed in order to let people go. Just kill the lamb because we want to eat it. And the Jews to this day eat it on the night to be much observed because that's when we're leaving Egypt. They didn't focus on the actual death of the lamb. It was just a means to an end. Jesus stops us and says, wait a bit. I want you to look at something else. The bread and the wine. Because that's me. That is me. Go to John 13. John 13. And we know these scriptures, but we just don't think about them sometimes. I wrote to one of the churches of God and I said, isn't it significant that Jesus died at the exact time that the Jews killed the Passover lamb? He wrote back and he said to me, there's no significance to Jesus dying at 3 o'clock. And I think, I wonder why Jesus allowed it to be put in the Bible. John 13, this is the scripture we actually read on that evening. It's the chapter about the foot washing, John 13, verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover. Whatever happened here happened before the feast of the Passover. Not during. Go back to John 19. I'll answer an awkward question here. John 19 and verse 14. Now, if we know something about the gospel books, we know that John was written much later. The previous three were addressed in a certain way. This one comes, and John, writing much later, gives us all the details of what happened that night. Why? Because he was the one sitting right next to Jesus. He was the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was the one, as it says, was leaning on Jesus' breast at that evening. He was right next to him. That's why we have several chapters. That's why we read John on that evening, because he's got the whole story. But he writes in John 19, verse 14, and he says, the day that Jesus was crucified, it was the preparation of the Passover. He calls that day, the day Jesus was crucified, the preparation of the Passover. If John knew that was the wrong Passover, would he have called it that? No, it was the preparation of the Passover. We just say, oh, well, it was the Jews' Passover, as being opposed to... No, there was just one Passover. And about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. So I have to answer that question there. Why did Pilate say at the 6th hour, here's your king? Because this was written much later and wasn't just addressed to the Jewish audience, but to the audience of the Roman Empire, John wrote using Roman time. We still have Roman time. In Roman time, 6th hour is 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was 6 o'clock in the morning when Pilate said, okay, here's your king. Go take him. And that's when they dragged him off. That's just to answer a question. How can it say 6th hour when we've just looked at 3rd hour being 9 o'clock, 6th hour being 12 o'clock, 9th hour being 3 o'clock? What's the 6th hour here? Well, just Roman time. I hope we can... you don't have to believe anything I said today. All I want you to do is just walk through the story. You walk into the room for the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper. They very obviously walked in just after sunset, because remember, after all this, Jesus washes their feet, and then he has the bread and the wine, the symbols of his body and blood. How long did it take him to wash 13 people's feet? No, one had left. 11 people, because he washed 11 pairs of feet. And then they ate the meal, and then during the meal, he takes the bread and the wine, he said, passes that around. And then he teaches them for quite a while. And then they walk from the upper room out, down the street, through the city, and then through the wall, through the gate. Then they walk down into the brook of Kidron, and then up the other side, and then they get to where the Garden of Gethsemane is. What time? It takes time to do all that, right? When he gets there, he tells the others, okay, you wait here, and he takes some of the disciples with him, and he prays for an hour. Comes back, he finds them fallen asleep. Can't you watch with me for 1 hour? He goes back, and he prays the same words. One would assume that he must have prayed for another hour, right? One minister wrote to me and said, oh, no, he didn't go back and pray for another hour. I said, you mean to tell me he went back to God and said, well, God, ditto. No, it says he went back and prayed more fervently than he did the first time. Would you want to add another hour onto that prayer? Yes. He comes back, he finds them sleeping. He goes and prays another hour. Okay. 3 hours of praying. Right? He wasn't looking at his watch, but that's what we can see what Jesus did, because if we're walking with him and seeing what he did, that's where he was. So what time did they arrest him? Everybody will agree, scholars all say it must have been somewhere around midnight. Which means he could not have left the upper room having eaten a lamb, only starting eating at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever. No, it makes sense. Let's go to the one scripture which everybody will show me and say, oh, no, you're wrong. Let's go back to Luke 22. Luke 22, verse 14. Luke 22, verse 14. When the hour was come, what hour? That's when they arrived at the upper room. When the hour was come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. And he said unto them, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not eat thereof until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And people say, you see, he did eat the Passover. But we've already proved it was impossible. Because it wasn't time. Plus, here's another thing. When the original Passover lamb was killed, God told Israel, each of you kill a lamb at your house. In Deuteronomy 16, prior to going into the promised land, God instructs Israel, now when you go into the promised land, I don't want you to kill the Passover lamb everywhere. You will kill it at the place where I will place my name. Which is why the Jews slaughtered the Passover lamb at the temple. You've ever seen that? I can go there. Deuteronomy 16, verse 5. A change was made. I didn't make it. Moses didn't make it. God did. Deuteronomy 16, verse 5. You may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates, which the Lord your God gives you, but at the place where the Lord your God shall choose to place his name, in there you shall sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the going down of the sun. To the Jews, when they read it in Hebrew, it means when the sun starts going down. That is when you kill the Passover lamb, and you will only do it, as it came to be, at the temple. It would have been wrong for Jesus. It would have been illegal, according to the law of God, for Jesus and the disciples to go off by the room with the upper room, or the house with the upper room, and go kill a Passover lamb behind the house. Nobody would have done that. If they had, the Jews would have arrested all of them, and all of them would have been crucified. That was the law of the land, based on the law of God. Interesting. What does Luke 22:15 mean? with desire. I wanted to eat this Passover with you, but I won't eat it with you until I eat it with you in the kingdom. Every translator of the Bible that you care to look at will tell you that has to be the meaning. I really wanted to eat this Passover with you. However, as Fenton's translation says, however, remember, at this point in time, Judas had shown himself for who he was. Jesus has said to Judas, go and do what you're going to do quickly. At that point in time, Jesus knew when he was going to die. Remember, it was the disciples who came to him and said, where shall we prepare the Passover? Jesus would have loved to have celebrated the Passover the next evening, what we call the night to be much remembered, when the Jews still get together and we have a nice meal and celebrate the fact that that's when they left Egypt. Jesus would have loved to have kept that with the disciples. But he didn't. He couldn't, because he died. I have thought of bringing my turkey to church. Bring it up here and say, okay, now how long will it take us to roast this turkey? And I thought, no. We don't need another turkey in the church of God. I'm already here. I hope that makes you think. And I'm not changing the time when we will be celebrating and taking the bread and the wine. I've been doing that for over 50 years, and I will be doing it this year, same time as you will and everybody else. What I'm saying is our explanation wasn't correct. And it's not my teaching. I learned this back in 1992. I thought, wait a bit. And some churches I've gone to, and I've explained it. Got down to Huntsville. Mr. Foy, Albert Foy down there, he and I sat down together, and he said, well, obviously that's the way it is. Over in Big Sandy, I wrote an article. Mr. Haver, I wondered what Mr. Haver would say about it. Mr. Haver said, did you see the article that Mr. Botha wrote? He could see it just like that. And yet other people will say, oh boy, don't. And all I say to them is, okay, if you don't believe me, you and I get together, we get a lamb, and we kill it. And we skin it. And we dress it. And we get it ready for roasting. And then we roast it. Most people have never done that. This is unfortunate. I've said that before. That the Bible was set in an agrarian society. God used sheep and planting and sowing and reaping and fruit on trees and all that. And unfortunately, most of the explanations that we get nowadays, we get from people who've never been with the sheep and the goats and the cattle and the manure. And we need to send them all to Alaska, and then they'll understand, hey, wait a bit, this takes time. Well, thanks for listening.